Hello and welcome to the premiere edition of Connolly Network Insight video updates. I plan to produce these videos to look back at the past couple of weeks' events and announcements that have impact on consumer network services, which are the focus of my consulting practice. In that practice, I specifically look at the impact of the big four networking companies, namely Alphabet, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, that those companies have on consumer network services such as messaging service, music services, wireless service, data service, and in particular video services, of which I've spent much of my career analyzing and understanding. So it's been a very, very eventful couple of weeks, so I have a lot to talk about in this premiere edition. The single biggest event that happened was the ruling on June 12th of Judge Leon on the AT&T Time Warner acquisition. The judge ruled very strongly in AT&T's favor, granting the approval to proceed with no conditions, and in fact admonishing the Justice Department that he would not grant a stay if they were so foolish as to consider an appeal. So a very, very powerful endorsement of this vertical merger, which, to be honest, never should have got to the courts in the first place. So what does this mean for AT&T? Well, AT&T, if you look back over the last few years, were primarily a wireless company, and they made the move after realizing that the wireless industry was very competitive and becoming stagnated in the US. They made the move into pay TV in a very big way by acquiring DirecTV and in one fell swoop becoming the biggest pay TV operator in the country. Now, having realized that as the big provider they had two choices, they could either choose to defend or they could choose to innovate as an attacker on the existing status quo of the industry. And they have chosen the latter, and hence are taking the bold step of trying to change the basis of pay TV. Now, why are they doing that? The satellite technology is rapidly aging and becoming less and less value as the industry shifts to an all-streamed, on-demand capability. It's interesting to note here that AT&T's principal competitor in the wireless space, Verizon, took a very different path. Verizon, having used their capital to acquire the part of the wireless business that they didn't own from Vodafone, were not really in the position to make a large acquisition and hence enter the pay TV space. What they chose instead was to directly target the digital advertising capability of Google and Facebook and try and go after the digital ads rather than the traditional pay TV ads. And they did that by launching a streamed service aimed at millennials using a programmatic targeted ad capability called Go90. And that service, to be honest, has been a failure. And they have not been able to strip away any significant revenue from Google and Facebook, and hence are not really a significant player in the video space to date. It's also interesting to note that having taken this relatively minor step versus AT&T's major step, Verizon stock has actually outperformed AT&T over the last couple of years. So with the AT&T ruling a positive one, it put the other major M&A project, the acquisition of Fox entertainment assets, clearly in play. Had the AT&T ruling been negative, it would have put quite a damper on that activity, but now it's full speed ahead for both Disney and Comcast to acquire those assets. So let's take a look at what's happened there. Comcast made a run at the Fox entertainment assets some time back and were rejected by the Fox board because of concerns that they would not get through regulatory approval. Disney then jumped in and struck a tentative deal to acquire all those assets. And in fact, there's a meeting scheduled for July 12th by the Fox board for final approval of that deal. But Comcast, having been emboldened by the AT&T decision, decided to jump back in. So they've made an all-cash offer of $65 billion, or about 19% higher than the Disney offer, and now the whole thing is clearly in play. So let's take a look at what's inside the Fox Entertainment assets and what value they have for both Comcast and Disney, to make some consideration of how it's likely to play out. So there are really four principal assets that are included in the Fox Entertainment sale. First of all, we have content assets, both the Fox Film Studios and Fox cable channels and television studios. So generating content to be added to either Disney's or Comcast's existing portfolio of content. And both of them would benefit significantly. I'd say Disney is in a stronger position currently than Comcast, so Comcast would probably benefit a little more from being able to add those significant Fox Entertainment content assets to their portfolio. The second piece are regional sports networks. Again, they're of value to both companies. Disney does not have a regional sports capability, but they have their flagship ESPN property, and they have recently launched a streaming service which carries content complementary to the main ESPN channel. And those regional sports content would fit very nicely into that ESPN Plus streaming service. Comcast, on the other side, already has a significant regional sports portfolio, and the Fox assets would delve in very nicely. Some analysts have estimated those Fox regional sports networks value in excess of $20 billion, so a significant chunk of the overall deal. The third asset is a one-third ownership in Hulu. And again, this would have a value for either suitor because the acquirer, the successful acquirer of those assets would become the majority controller of the Hulu streaming capability. Disney clearly intends to use the Hulu assets to complement their sports streaming that they've already launched, their classic Disney streaming that they will launch next year, and then more mature content would flow over Hulu. So they would have a set of 3 streaming assets that they would use to carry the range of their content. Comcast, on the other hand, has no streaming capability at all right now, other than their ownership of 1/3 of Hulu. And because of their acquisition of NBC Universal, they had to be a passive owner. One of the conditions of the approval of that deal was that they impacted no decisions of Hulu. And now that restriction runs out this September. But for Comcast, Hulu could become their principal streaming channel. It's up to, it's running, it's up at volume, it has brand recognition, so a significant add, I would say more valuable to Comcast than to Disney. And the fourth and final piece of the puzzle, which is a little complicated, is the 31% that Fox owns of Sky in the UK. Now, Fox had already been attempting to acquire the rest of Sky to have total ownership, and that had been blocked by the British regulators. Meanwhile, with both Disney and Comcast jumping in to acquire not only the 31%, but the rest of Sky as part of the deal, the regulators in the UK 2 weeks ago approved either Disney or Comcast as a potential acquirer of that capability. So what do you get with Sky? Well, the 20-some million customers that are primarily satellite based, although they also have a stream service that runs over IP networks, and operates in the UK, in Ireland, and several countries on the mainland as well. Plus, they have a large presence in India with Star India, which also has a stream service and a satellite-based service. And so for either Disney or Comcast, they get significant international expansion capability, and I'd say it's of value to either of those companies. So all of the pieces of the sale of the Fox assets are valuable to either Disney or Comcast. I'd say we'll be in for a fairly protracted fight. They're both going to work hard to try and win those assets. And then, of course, whoever doesn't win will start looking around at the rest of the industry in terms of other capabilities that they might acquire. So I think this notion of consolidation of M&A, the combination of content plus distribution, is a trend that will clearly roll out and be quite a competitive environment for the next little while. We should finally note, however, that just because the AT&T, which was a vertical merger, was approved, not clear that a horizontal merger, including Fox Entertainment with either Disney or Comcast, would successfully get through the regulatory approval. Staying with video for a bit, 2 international sports deals announced in the past couple of weeks. Live sports has been one of the principal drivers of the value of traditional pay TV, getting exclusive access to sports content that fans highly value. So 2 deals were announced. First of all, Amazon acquired rights to Premier League soccer games in the UK, which has a huge draw amongst their fan base. So they have access to a number, not all, but a number of the Premier League games. And secondly, there was an announcement by the PGA that Discovery Channel is going to have international rights to all the PGA tournaments for a multi-year $2 billion deal going forward, and they'll roll that out through selected countries over the next several years. So another indicator that the value of sports continues to be high in spite of declining attendance and declining viewing habits, but that's certainly not going to go away, and people continue to fight to get access to that exclusive content. So I have 3 other things to talk about unrelated to the video space. First of all, Apple held their Worldwide Developer Conference talking about iOS 12 and the iPhones coming out later this fall. And it's clear that there's going to be no wow, new, must-have functionality in the upcoming releases, but I think instead they're focusing on the value to their existing installed base of 1.3 billion iOS users for a reliable, easy-to-use, glitch-free service. Apple also made some noises about advertising. They had gotten into the advertising game and got out of it a few years back, but now again with that huge installed base of iOS users, particularly going to the App Store to look for new functionality, there's a natural fit for an advertising base to fit into that ecosystem. So they're looking to launch that. And then secondly, they fired a shot over the bow of Facebook talking about social networking capability that would be coming out in iOS 12. So again, I think what Apple are really trying to do is to maximize the value of this massive installed base of iOS users in as many ways as they can. The second non-video event was the launch of the GDPR capability in Europe, and this regulation, which puts restrictions on the way users' data is used, with some very serious penalties for abuse of that data, has now become law for anyone operating in the UK. And my opinion is that it is government intervention into a serious issue that may well have more harm than good. It's clear that already the big guys have been preparing for this, and we're already seeing traffic flowing off of small users onto the big guys like Google, because they were able to certify that their users have opted in for this new environment. Blockchain-based products are not at all compatible with this new regulatory requirement, so that is going to have to take some serious rework. And I just feel that even though it's well intended, it's a heavy-handed bureaucratic capability that will likely cost more than the benefit it extracts. So we'll see going forward how this plays out, but right now I'm not very optimistic that the public will in fact be better off because of this capability. And finally, an announcement from the federal government of a new supercomputer at the Oak Ridge Labs in Tennessee, capable of running 200 petaflops and taking back the distinction of being the world's most powerful computer from the Chinese, who have held that title since 2013. Now, the interesting thing for me, there are always going to be new supercomputers and they're going to have more capability, but this one is very different in that instead of being a traditional CPU computational-based algorithmic architecture, this is focused around deep learning. So it's NVIDIA GPUs driving a deep learning-based system. And I think deep learning is one of the most fundamental changes taking place in computing architecture, and it's becoming more and more pervasive. It's the basis of the advantage that the big four networking guys have, because you train these systems rather than program them. You train them with known data, and the more data you have, the more you're able to train them, the more powerful they become. And so some of these very, very difficult government-driven projects, weather predicting, military projects, nuclear processes, biomedical processes, all of these are going to benefit from a deep learning based capability. And so I think this is a pretty significant change, and I expect that all of the other future supercomputing efforts are going to follow this model as well. So that's it for the Premier Edition. A lot went on in the past couple of weeks. Hopefully I've been able to show you how some of these events fit into the evolution of the consumer network space, and I'll continue to try and lay out a consistent set of themes and test the evidence in terms of whether announcements and events and activities fit those, or whether the model needs to be modified. So that's it for today. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.